Hey listeners, this is your host Brian Almeida. I have a special announcement before we get started on this week's solo episode. I'm going to be offering a handful of my guests what I want to call a 15-minute discoverable call. This is just 15 minutes with me to discuss anything you want, podcasting, something going on in your life, facing vulnerability, whatever it might be. I'm going to include a link for my calendar in the show notes where you can book your 15-minute call, and I look forward to speaking with some of you soon. Thanks and take care. Welcome to the Vulnerable Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Almeida. Each week we'll share inspiring stories and tips on facing vulnerability and the lessons we can use to help us be able to find success and fulfillment in our own lives. With each episode, we hope to impact one listener, and if anything you've heard has impacted you, we'd appreciate you sharing it on social. Thank you for listening. Now let's get vulnerable. This is episode 2 of RelatABLE Thursdays. Hey listeners, so we're back for the second episode of RelatABLE Thursdays. This week I'm going to talk about something more recent in my life, something that I've also talked about on a previous solo episode, and that's male infertility. As I spoke about in my second solo episode in the beginning of this year, this is something that I've had to deal with recently in my life in terms of my wife and I having a kid. But I wanted to get into it a little bit more and really just focus on this one thing for today's episode, because I think it's just something that needs to be talked about more for many reasons. One, because I think that there's a very little sort of knowledge about it, very little attention paid to the subject. And the second reason is because I think that if more men were to sort of realize that this is something that happens, that they might be able to sort of avoid certain things, or not necessarily avoid, but at least be able to know what's going on. Because the unfortunate part with male infertility is it's very hard to notice. It's female infertility is something that, through a lot of the sort of checkups and everything that they have, certain things can be discovered. But with male infertility, it's something that can go undiscovered for a long period of time. And really, unless you're willing to sort of go to your doctor and ask for certain tests, it's something you might not find about until it's far too late. In my case, it was almost there, and in some cases, it gets there. In some cases, it's too late, and there's nothing that can be done. So I mean, to start off, the first thing I think I want to sort of touch on is dealing with your ego in terms of this. For me, the first time around that my wife and I went to a fertility clinic, I didn't want to admit that there might be anything wrong with me. They told me, I need to lose weight because I sat for my job. I need to buy a standing desk. Certain things that they said I should do. And for me, it was just like, well, I don't think there's anything wrong with me. And, I think, that whatever they're saying is just some way for them to maybe, I don't know, make money, or it was a weird sort of headspace to be in. All I thought about was, why aren't you giving me good suggestions? Why are you just giving me suggestions to make me spend money? Little did I know that maybe some of those suggestions were better than I thought. But again, because of my ego and sort of saying to myself, what you're telling me is sort of superficial and there's probably nothing wrong with me, that stopped me from actually looking into it anymore. And then this time around, dealing with the ego was in the sense that, you come to this realization that as a man, you're supposed to be able to provide, you're supposed to be able to do your part in obviously creating a child, and then you're not able to. And that definitely takes a hit at your ego, because you're like, well, this is sort of a function of being a man, and now I can't be that man. And so, it was different each time, but I still had to relate with that whole, or touch on that whole part of my ego, and sort of realize, like, this is not really the important part about how it's hurting me or affecting me. It's more about what can I do about the whole situation? How can I, get through this situation with my wife and get to the point of having a kid? The other thing that really hit me right away was how fragile our bodies can be. I mean, our bodies, we sort of just go on and with our lives, not really maybe some of us obviously take better care, but we may not take the best care of our bodies that we can. We sort of take our bodies for granted. We think we're gonna maybe not think we're gonna live forever, but in that sense, we don't think about the foods that we eat necessarily. May not work out as much as we should, and do all these other things that we should probably be doing, and we don't realize that the effects that this might have on our body over the long term. And when I started doing some more research into male infertility, I realized that there's a few things that I had been doing that may have affected this or may have caused this to happen. It's one of those things. It's really unknown at this point. Even as much research as I could do, it's still a very it's still a subject that's very loosely, or I don't know how to say loosely researched, but it's just there's no real clear picture on it. There's multiple reasons, there's multiple things that could cause male infertility. It could be injuries, it could be drugs, it could be obesity, it could be cigarettes, it could be food. It's like the list just goes on and on and on, but there's nothing that really says this is what causes it and it's 100% the cause of it. So yeah, I mean, for me, like one thing that sort of came up when I was doing the research is that the some of the causes, again, like I just said, were obesity and marijuana. Now, I've struggled with my weight most of my life. Could that have been the issue? I don't know. I've smoked marijuana. Could that have been the issue? I don't know. Like I said, because of these causes and because there's so many of them, it's really hard to say what causes it for each person. And again, there's different sort of diagnosis as well. My diagnosis, which I spoke about in my last solo episode earlier this year, it was something called primary testicular failure, and this is basically an issue in my hormones. There's lower levels of testosterone and higher levels of two other what's the word I'm looking for? Two other hormones in my body, FSH and LH. There's higher levels of that. And so again, these levels cause my brain to not tell my testicles to produce enough sperm. And that's pretty much all it is. I've never had any major injuries to that area. I've never had anything else, but something in my body decided that, these two hormones weren't going to work properly. And nothing else about me shows, low levels of testosterone. I have a full beard. I'm a big guy, but for whatever reason, this is something that's going on inside my body. So it's one of those things. Like I said, I could have gone to my doctors every year, got the normal checkups, but unless I did certain blood work, unless I did sperm tests, unless I did all these other things, there really was no way of figuring this out. There was no way of knowing that this was happening. It just sort of was happening over time. And luckily, I like I said earlier in the episode, luckily I caught it when I did by going to a fertility clinic. Had I left this for another couple of years or even maybe another 12 months, I really don't know. I mean, at this point in time, I could be at a point where I might be completely infertile. I don't know, and I won't know until the next time I have to do one of these tests, if I do one of these tests. So it's one of those things, like I said, I'm glad that I found out when I did. But if you can find out sooner, it may be better for you in the long run, because, it gets to a point where if you can't produce, then you can't at all help in having a child. And then you're looking at either donors or you're looking at adoption. And these are conversations that, again, they're going to be, some people have to have them, but for a lot of us, it may not be the easiest conversation. And in my opinion, what might be easier is sort of doing some of these tests or talking to your doctors about these sort of things, because again, it's something that if you catch early enough, there's still some things that can be done, whether it's looking at some sort of treatments that might help, or whether it's, freezing sperm so that if you get to a point where you're not producing, you still have that sort of in storage, and then you can use that in different processes, whether it be IUI, IVF, or other processes to help with the sort of conceiving a child. So another huge fact that really surprised me, and I talked about this again in my previous episode, but looking at it again on in the research that I did for this episode, there's approximately 40% of males that are infertile for many different reasons. And 40% to me is a huge number. I mean, that means 4 out of 10 guys. So if you look at you and 10 people, 10 males that you could be one of four. It's not a small number. If it was, 5%, 10%, this may be something that I wouldn't even necessarily talk about or wouldn't think is important. But when you're talking 40%, you're verging on 50% of men. That's a high number. That's something that I think, there's probably a handful of people that I know that might have to deal with this at some point that are unaware of it. And that's, again, why I'm putting this out. I want to create that awareness around this, and I want to do my part in doing that in multiple different ways. I mean, this podcast, my second solo episode was another one, and there's hopefully going to be other ways for me to do that over time once I figure out how to do it, and also once I really get an understanding of this subject, because I still don't have a full understanding, but I definitely have a better understanding because I've wanted to dive into it since sort of it came into my life, since I've had to deal with it. The other thing that amazes me and is that this wasn't an issue 50 years ago. I mean, 50 years ago, you didn't really hear about these issues in men. I mean, men were extremely more fertile, and there wasn't, again, any real conversation about male infertility. I don't know what the percentages were back then, if there were any, but they definitely weren't 40%. In fact, men were producing a lot more sperm back then than they are now. And could this be due to, chemicals, foods, things that have come in over the last 50 years? I wouldn't doubt it. I mean, again, when I was doing the research, there was so many different reasons that it's hard to really understand what the main reason would be. But I do know, if we look at obesity, for example, the correlation between obesity 50 years ago and obesity now is huge. It's I think doubled or tripled since 50 years ago. So again, there's certain things that definitely stand out to me, but there's no way of knowing which one is going to be the cause for different people, because again, different things affect different people, and it's just, again, without doing tests, it's next to impossible to know. So if I can suggest anything, I would suggest maybe going out, talking to your doctor, saying you want to do a couple of tests. I mean, it's like I said, it's a blood test and a sperm test. It's not really anything too intrusive or anything like that, but it might give you some insight as to what you might have to deal with, down the road, should you be deciding to have children. So yeah, I mean, like I said, go talk to your doctor. That would be my first piece of advice. The other thing that I want to touch on in this episode really is also the fact that because of the issues that I have with my body and the direction that my wife and I had to go to conceive a child, which was IVF. I mean, knowing that we had to go through IVF, and because it was more so because of my body and not hers, added a whole new set of struggles might not be the right word, but we'll go with that for now. Like it added a whole new set of struggle to the situation, for me especially, because to realize that you can't help in the way that you should be able to, and again, I guess I'm sort of stepping back into the ego, but it's to realize that you can't provide for your wife, you can't help in the way that you want to create this life, to bring this child into the world. It that hurts, and it hits you hard. I mean, the day that we found out, it hit me really hard, because it made me think about the past. It made me think about other reasons that I had sort of come up with in my head as to why we weren't conceiving it. It just made me, for lack of a better term, it made me feel like a jerk. It made me feel like an idiot. It just made me look at myself and say, what the hell's wrong with you? And although what was wrong with me is not something that I necessarily could have been aware of, it still made me question a lot of things from the past, right? And then having to see my wife go through the struggles of IVF, the injections, just the wear and tear that it takes on you emotionally and physically was hard, because again, it wasn't her body. Her body was fine. If nothing was wrong with me, then chances are we could have done this naturally and we wouldn't have had to go through this process. Had I paid more attention 5 years ago, we might not have had to go through this process. So again, it's just that thing of, having to see somebody else go through so much struggle because of your own ignorance. It's not easy to deal with. And I don't want to see I'd prefer to see less people go through this. I'd prefer to see more people find out a little bit sooner. Because again, for women, it's a little bit easier to find out. It's a little bit easier to discover issues with their body. But for us guys, we're not going to know unless we specifically ask to do these tests. Which, again, it seems kind of funny to me. If the infertility of men is at 40%. It seems to me that we should be paying a little more attention to this. We should be trying to help men out a little bit more. But at the end of the day, I guess until we speak up, I don't know if anything will be done. I mean, if you look at media and everything like that, it's more focused on female infertility and the things that are wrong with females, or the fact that, because of high levels of stress and, women in the workforce and the things that you have to deal with in there is causing these issues with infertility. But then we don't look at the male side of things and what could be causing that. Like I said, obesity, cigarette smoking, marijuana, whatever it might be. These are things that, I see a lot of men doing, and they probably wouldn't think it's going to affect them in any way whatsoever. They'll continue to do these habits. I continue to do a lot of bad habits without thinking that it was really affecting me. Even when I spoke with the doctors at the fertility clinic in regards to my smoking of marijuana, they didn't think it really caused any of this to happen. But in doing my research, it was one of the top causes. So, it's really hard to sort of understand this whole area right now, because I still think, like I said, there's very little known about it. But I think the more that we speak about it, the more that we talk about it, the more that we'll find out. If somebody, that's listening to this wants to reach out to me and talk to me about my experience, I have no problem talking about it. I've been open about this area of my life twice, and I can, and like I said, I want to continue to be open about it. I want to continue to help others, whether I've even thought maybe to look into sort of groups that might be out there, if there is any, or, even speaking with the clinics that we went to, or the clinic that helped us get pregnant specifically, just to sort of see if there's anything that they're doing, or if there's anything that they're sort of bringing up to help men understand this. Because even when you go into the clinics, it's not like there's posters or information or anything like that I could see that talked about male infertility, that made it so that maybe guys that are coming in there with their wife realize, okay, wait, maybe this isn't just her, maybe it's me. Again, for us, we didn't find out until, we were, I think, a couple months into the process. My wife had gone through a ton of blood work. I had gone through a little bit of blood work. And that's the other thing too. Like, when you go to these fertility clinics, my wife was getting blood taken out, multiple times, day after day, week after week. And for me, it was like one blood test and I think one sperm test. And then all of a sudden we sit down after months of all these sort of different tests and things. And they're like, well, the issues with me, with Brian, the issues with his body, and here's what's going on. And then I went for a second opinion to another doctor to make sure, because again, not that I didn't believe what the fertility clinic was telling me, but I always like to have a second opinion. So I went and got that second opinion. And again, it was one bit of blood work, I think, for them. I don't even think I did a sperm test for them. And they were able to tell me, sort of what the fertility clinic was saying was right. So, but it's so little that I had to do. And that's why, like I said earlier, I would really suggest that more men, if you're concerned about this, or if this is making you think at all, to go out there and do these tests. It's not that difficult for us, but it may give you insight into things that you're unaware of. And aside from fertility, it may give you insight into other things that you're unaware of. Again, it's, these aren't really difficult tests that have to be done, to sort of come to these conclusions, or to realize, what's going on with your body, because there's nothing that's really going to tell you aside from that. I didn't feel any different. I didn't, like I said, there wasn't like a loss of hair. My head, I mean, I'm balding now, but I think so does every other man. But, like I said, my body size was good. My full face of hair, like nothing would have told me that I had low testosterone levels. There's nothing, even when we went through all the other sort of, I guess, correlations, you would say, with low testosterone levels, I don't really have any of them. So, it's one of those things where it's next to impossible to tell when it comes to men. So, for me, like, at the end of the day, I'm glad that, my wife and I are pregnant now, that I know about this, that I was able to sort of get an understanding of it before it was too late. Because like I said, waiting another couple of years, who knows what would happen. I've been told at this point that by the time I'm in my 40s that I may not produce anymore. and so then I'm completely infertile. At that point, will it affect me as much? Will it matter to me as much? I don't know, because I'm hoping that by that point we've had the kids that we want to have, and that part of our life is sort of, not done, but is we've moved past it. But at the same time, that could happen next year. And if I had to wait another year for my wife and I to get pregnant, then, like I said at the beginning of this episode, what would we be looking at? What are our options then? And that's, again, much harder discussions, in my opinion, and things that we definitely wouldn't have wanted to necessarily had to look at. What we had to go through was hard enough as it is, but at least this child is, like I said, it's ours, and we're able to, know that it's created from both of us. And again, not that there's anything wrong with adoption or anything like that, but again, it's that, I don't know, it's that thing of, I don't think that that's what anybody really sort of pictures at the end of the day, or wants at the end of the day. They get there because of something like this happening, and they have to get to that point where that's the only option. So if you can make it so that doesn't have to be the only option, I think that that's going to be better for any of us. So yeah, so again, guys, I'm glad that you guys are listening to these episodes, and that they might be helping you in some way or another. Again, like I said, if you want to reach out to me on social. I've also got a link in the show notes that you could set up a 15-minute call with me if this is a subject that you want to talk about. I'm sure I can give you more than 15 minutes, but again, it's just, let's start talking about this more. If there's any guys out there listening that have gone through something like this, please reach out. If there's any guys, that know somebody, maybe sort of have them reach out. I want to get some more conversations started about this, and hopefully through some more content and things that I'll do in the future, like articles, and once I get some more research in this, I'll be able to provide some more insight as well. Like I said, whether it's looking into groups that might be out there or other information that I'm just unaware of so far. So again, guys, thanks for taking the time to listen to this episode, and we'll see you again next week. Take care. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe and follow the podcast on Instagram at vulnerable.podcast or on Facebook and LinkedIn. You can also follow me, Brian Almeida, by searching my name on all platforms. If the podcast has impacted you in any way, I would also greatly appreciate a review. Lastly, if you know anyone with a great story of going from struggle to success, I would love to have them on. Thank you, and see you next week.